Well, I'm finally back doing another demo for my YouTube channel. I've been absent for a while. I've had a lot going on in the studio. There's been exhibitions and things like that, but also I have a new website that's being developed, and there was a lot of work involved in doing that, but it's finally done. On my website, I have a blog, so I add on there new YouTube videos, but I also sometimes just do written content which will show progress shots of paintings and perhaps ways I've gone about painting that particular subject. So keep in touch on the website as well, or of course, subscribe to this channel. It's great to be back. I've finally got the technical side set up to do the filming, so hopefully the painting goes together okay, and then all I've got to do is get my head around the editing. So let's get going on what we're going to do today. For my demo today, I'm going to show you how I go about painting zebra. I've got a photo here of just a face with the eye, and often when painting zebra you look at them and you think, well, it's just black and white, but we need to still make them interesting. And if you look closely at the photo of the zebra, even the white has got a lot of colour in it. It's not just pure white. There's it's white fur or hair, and in between is all little dark bits in there, and it's quite colourful. So it's not a case of just only painting the black stripes and leaving the white. We've still got to be able to tone the white with some colour. But also when we come to paint black, we don't really want to just do a boring old black. It will look really flat. So we want our blacks to have some interesting colour. So that's what I'm going to show you today. When I paint zebra and I do a multi-animal work, so it could have, 10 zebra bodies in it, it's very easy to get lost in the process. So I have some simple tricks up my sleeve that help me keep track of where I'm going with those stripes, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. The drawing for the zebra, this obviously is not a very difficult drawing because it's actually quite a large picture focusing on the eye. The stripes are very big, but you imagine if this was a complex painting of several zebras, you would have stripes going every which way. So sometimes you just need to find a way that's going to make it easy to find a pencil here. Find it easy to get the drawing down so that you can follow it afterwards. A couple of times I've painted zebra only to find that I've painted the black in the white area, and sometimes that's fixable because if it's a large area you can then just manipulate the stripes and put them in a slightly different spot. All zebras have a different pattern, so there are no identical ones. So if you have to make up your own because you made a slight error where you put the black paint, that would be fine, no one would ever know. But it's nice to get it right the first time. So what I do, I never draw directly onto a piece of watercolour paper. So this is a piece of watercolour paper and the drawing is ready, but I haven't done my practice drawing on here so that I've got to keep rubbing it out. I like to get a light drawing on here, and I always do them slightly heavier when I'm doing them for a class or a workshop, because I've got to be able to talk and paint at the same time, and you need a bit more guidelines. But if I was painting the subject for my own use at any time, I keep the lines very, very light. I'm not one of the watercolour artists that actually enjoys seeing the pencil lines in the finished work. So if I keep them light, then that's going to help. Then what I need obviously is a drawing. This is one I've pulled out of my file that's been used for a class at some stage or other. It's done on a piece of tracing paper, and it's got liner pen on it, so it's quite dark. If I placed this on my light box, or if you don't have a light box, you can pick it up in a sunny window. you put it on your light box and you put your piece of watercolour paper over the top, and the light shines through and you can see where it is that you're drawing. This is how I transfer most of my paintings that might require some drawing. But when it comes to doing something like the stripes for this, you may think we've only got to paint half the painting because there's all the white. But we'd like to know that we're going to put the white in the right spot. So as I'm doing the drawing and it's sitting on the light box, I sometimes just use a cross or a B for black, whatever, and in a light pencil mark, as I'm seeing the dark shapes coming through the light box, I will just put a marking to tell me where it's got to be black. And because this paint is going to be so dark, it's going to cover up any letters that I've written here. And what it means is that when I get going on the painting process, it's a little easier to paint, be a bit freezy as you're putting it down, because you can see that you're not going to be going into a wrong spot. If this were to be a bigger zebra on a piece of paper, there would be many, many more stripes. So this technique can be very handy, but of course it can still, you know, some of the stripes might go from the top of your painting, following through in like this, be very narrow and coming down. You've got to maybe put your little B mark in several places along the same stripe. So I do this, here's an instance of it, this one here. So we've got a long part that comes from the top of his head coming down, round here, under the eye and to here. Well, I can put my little marking in several places for that, my little guideline. I know this sounds incredibly basic to do something like this, but at the end of the day, we want to concentrate on making nice, fresh looking watercolours. And if we can do some things that take away a little bit of the concentration that we might require in doing something like this, that's got to make life easier. So this is black in here, this is white in here. Looks like I've missed one over here. So I'm just going to have a little look at this to make sure I'm getting what I want. So I think this white should have been there. This here is the eye, there's the corner of the eye, this is the edge of the eye socket, comes down here, and it looks to me like I've missed a little bit of a black shape here. So I come round up here and just get it to meet up there. So what have I got there? The white there, the black there. So this has got to be black. It's black under the eye, black here, black there. So even doing a tracing when you're doing it on your light box, when you take it off, you have your reference photo, you've got your drawing that you think that you've just done quite accurately on the light box. You then are going to take some time to have a look at it and make sure that you actually have transferred everything that you need. Because it's much easier to fix that sort of thing up before you start painting than after the painting, once the painting process has started. So that's what I'm going to do now before we start painting. Just have a quick look, make sure I've got everything. Yep, I reckon I have. Now, I've never been one for using masking fluid to do a zebra painting, but it is possible. And I'm going to share with you, I'm going to go and find it first of all, a painting that I did quite a few years ago where I actually did mask the white stripes out. So let me just see if I can find that. So this large painting here is, well, it's full sheet going this way. They're just a little bit chopped off on the side. And I painted this quite a few years ago. But what I did is I used masking fluid on this. I thought I'd be awfully clever. And I had my drawing on a light box. I put my piece of paper over the top. And instead of drawing the stripes, I masked everywhere that looked like it was white. So there was no drawing, just the white, just the masking fluid in the white areas. When I took the paper off ready to paint, I had masking fluid over all of the white areas. What it meant then, especially as this is quite large, see if I can zoom out and you can see how large this is. Maybe I can't zoom out, that's going to be it. Put it this way, you can see it's quite a large painting. So I've got all this masking fluid on there, which you'd think, oh, well, that's going to make it very, very easy. But of course, the white stripes never remain white, so there's still painting to do in those. But what it did mean is because it was such a large subject, I could use a really large brush, something like this sort of thing. And technically, because all the white is covered up and is going to be safe, I could paint like this and paint the darks freely everywhere I needed them to go, knowing that I wasn't going to get through to the white of the paper. Then when I was happy with the consistency of the dark, I rubbed off, it was dry, I rubbed off all the masking fluid, and then I had to colorize the edges and soften the edges of the white areas and put a bit of colour into them. But that was a fairly quick way of doing a large one like this, and didn't require the concentration as I was painting the darks. It only required the concentration of putting the masking fluid down. I haven't done it like that again. I don't use the masking fluid now. I've gone to the system that I've just showed you of having a better roadmap of where those darks have got to go. The colour required to do the zebra, we talked about making interesting black. So before I start, I would have a little look at what it is I'm going to use for my black. You can build colour up in layers so that you can get darker as you go. But when you're actually going to be painting a black subject, I always find it far easier to actually mix my paint up a bit creamy in the first place. If I mix it up creamy and I can get it down in one go, then I haven't got to do layering. I don't mind doing layering when perhaps I want to have glazes of different colours over the top of each other. But when I really just want to go in to get a nice juicy dark, I would rather mix it up creamy. When you make your colour choices for black, you obviously got to choose something that's going to go dark enough, but it just doesn't have to be boring old black. So black out of a tube could be okay. I have never used black out of a tube, but if you were to use black out of a tube, put another colour in with it to make it a bit interesting. My go-to colour for black is always seems to be the same old two. I colorise this up a little bit though to still make it interesting. So what I've got here, I have got French Ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Now with those two colours, I can get a really, really dark black, but I can vary it so that sometimes it looks bluer and sometimes it looks browner. Now to get it to be really dark, you can't use tea or milk consistency paint. It's got to be creamy. Now creamy means you still need a damp brush to be able to get paint to release. So it's always going to have some water to carry it. But this is cream consistency. Then if I put the brown in with that, also in cream consistency, I start getting black. Now when I do this, and some colours are bossier than others, but also it's not an exacting science to pick out colours from a palette and think, well, I've got equal amounts, and sometimes it's not equal amounts that you need because one colour, as I say, could be bossier. But you can't measure the water, you can't measure the exact amount of paint. It's all eyeballing and experience, I guess. But when you put it down, if you find that it looks too brown, well, all you've got to do is put a bit more blue on it. And if it looks too blue, well, you put a bit more brown on it. But when you let this colours bleed out from that fairly strong colour swatch here, you'll see what I mean about the variety that those two colours has created. Just see if I can zoom in on that a little bit. You can see that I've got brown, I've got a grey, I've got something that looks fairly dark like black. I'm looking at it, obviously I can see it a bit better than you. It looks a little brown, so I could drop a bit more blue into it and really get it to look like black. But look at all that variety from just two colours. That is what I generally use for my choice of blacks. So let's just take that back out again a little bit here so you can see my mixing. So I'm going to stick with this, but you could find your own nice mixes, and it's good to have a little practice and find out what your favourites might be. This is Payne's Grey, which reads as black. I think mine might have a little bit of blue in it anyway, but look how black that looks. I may not get the variety from this that I would like, but I could choose the Payne's Grey and play around putting something else in with it. You know, what if I decided I wouldn't mind him having a little bit of pinky tones to it? I could always just add a little bit of pink and get some interest that way. Now, some people will say, well, what about indigo? Well, indigo is very blue and would require a bit more work to turn that to looking black. A lot of students seem to like using indigo. I actually don't use it a great deal. This is going to be a purple zebra if I do it like this. However, it's possible to get it to look, it's got to read black. You want your zebra to read like a black and white animal that it is. However, you would like it to look a little bit interesting. Now look at that with the indigo, and what did I put in with it? Alizarin crimson. Alizarin crimson and indigo. So depending what you've got in your palette or what your favourites are, or do you want to just mix it up? I should mix it up more. I don't know how many zebra paintings I've done, but I always tend to go for my stock standard one over here. But I quite like the Payne's Grey. I quite like that. So there's your choices. But do this type of practicing first, because if you get this worked out, given you basically really only need two colours, your painting is a black and white painting. If you get this worked out, the painting process is going to be very, very fast. So let's get going on that and see what we can do here. This is a reasonably quick demo when it comes to painting it. I just really wanted to share with you how I go about doing that drawing, make the colour choices. The actual painting is just the same as painting anything that we do, really. Use the biggest brush that you can for the job that you're doing. Because we haven't got masking fluid, you may wish to do it a little bit carefully. I think I'm going to just take this down just so that it stops sliding around here. But I want to be able to pick it up maybe. So let me just stop for a minute and just put a bit of tape on this. Okay, so I've just taped that down so that I can still pick up the painting and move it around, but it's not going to perhaps slide so easily on my table. This is being painted on Arches cold press paper, £140 or 300 GSM. I don't paint on Arches paper anymore, so I know this drawing's been sitting on here for a few years, and I found it in the file. It's got a big watermark on here, so that's why I know it's Arches. I'm going to stick with my usual colour here and just show you how now to go about painting this and to soften those whites and make it come together. I'm going to start with the eye. I tend to start with the eye. A lot of people say, oh, they leave that to the end because, you know, why sort of have it staring at you or whatever. I prefer to have the eye done because I feel like then I'm painting something that's looking at me and it's real. This eye has got, I hope you can see this here, lots and lots of eyelashes, and the highlights that you can see in the eye here, I can't work out where the pupil is, where the eye is. It's just really, really dark. This is obviously a reflection of something going on in here. So I might just try and paint it as I see it. Now, because the eyelashes are dark, I've actually got to only try and save the white in between. So I'm going to start first of all just with brown to do this eye. And I'm just going to concentrate a little bit. I'm going to try and leave that little membrane white part that I can see there, and I'm going to try and paint around some of the eyelashes here. If you were painting this and you wanted to use masking fluid, well, you could put some masking fluid in here. But as I say, I'm going to do this whole painting with no masking fluid. But let me, actually, I could use a bit of this dark area here. So I'm just going to, as I say, follow where I can see that there's a little white space and leave that. And don't use the masking fluid. So paint either side of that little membrane that I can see there. And this is into the corner of his eye. And when you paint from photos, I mean, I can't paint from a real zebra. When you paint from photos, you really can only paint what you see. You can't, you know, I can't make out what this fleshy stuff and whatever is in here. So all I can do is paint. If it looks dark, paint it dark. If it looks light, paint it light. But I can't do any more than that because I don't have an understanding of the makeup of the eyeball for a zebra. And so I've got another white line around the eyeball here. So I've drawn the edge of the eyeball in, so I've got to save a white line, really, either side of my drawing. So this is probably the most careful bit that I'm going to do is around this eyeball. I don't really have to worry about the dark eyelashes on the dark parts of the eyeball. So let me just get this part in. So there's that little white edge to the eyeball here. Let's see if I can zoom in so you can see a little bit more about what I'm doing here with the eyeball. Okay, so just my go-to colours, same for the eye really, just the burnt sienna and the French ultramarine. So I've drawn a little bit of a line here of where I can see that white. And it's not pure white, it's still got quite shadowy look to it, but I'm just going to try and skirt around it a little bit. Hopefully that I can turn it into the highlights afterwards. Of course, we've always got the option of using some opaque white for any really lost bits that you haven't been able to retain, that's in small areas. That is fine. I don't mind if if I have to sort of dig out a little bit of white, if it's a really tiny area. But if it's a big area that you've made a boo-boo in and you've lost the white of the paper, to me, I think it's better just to start again. So this just takes a wee bit of concentration here with this eye. I'm not even going to try and paint the eyelashes at this stage. I'm just painting where it's dark versus where it's light. And I'm just reaching in to my brown and my black, scooping up the paint. So sometimes the paint is going on my brush a little brown and sometimes it's going on a little bluer. When it mixes on the paper, it will hopefully make some nice dark looking area. So where the eyelashes are here, in actual fact, they would all have a little highlight even on the eyelashes, and that's how you can see them over the dark area. So what I might do, I'll paint the eyelid, bottom of the eye lid area there, and this has got to all be dark. So I've already made a little bit of a error here with the highlight. Doesn't matter. This, you know, nobody's going to see the photograph afterwards, so you just carry on. Some things really don't matter, and when you try and make a fuss about them, it's evident that you've made a fuss about them, and they look worse than it would have ever looked if you just left it alone. So if you make a little bit of a blue boo-boo like with the highlight, well, what does that matter? The highlight's in a different spot. So I just come around here with my brown paint now, bit of blue over here. Yeah, I reckon this could be the pupil up behind here. It's hard to tell, but you don't have to make it up. All you've got to do is follow darks and lights. So what I'm going to do here is try and flick out some eyelashes here so that there is a little edge on them. But I need it to be basically dark. Just see if I can capture a wee bit of light on some of those. And come down over this highlight with these. Hopefully you can see what it is that I'm doing here. One thing about doing YouTube demos, it's been a huge learning curve for me, but one thing is you've only really got one shot at it. Once you've completed the painting, if something didn't work with the videoing, well, it's too late, you've finished. So your dialogue could be there and maybe not the painting. I have had that happen and had to just give up. Right, so I've got a few eyelashes in there. It needs a bit of darkening in between. This highlight is far too bright because it's underneath all of these eyelashes, but I'm going to let that dry and reassess that afterwards. So there's my careful bit of painting. That's the smallest area probably that I had to paint, and I've managed to keep my white edge here. I've managed to keep the little white capture part there, so that's not so bad. this is much bigger, the eyelid area around here, or eye socket, whatever, here. So I can do that with a bigger brush. If you paint with a small brush, this is a number 2, great for doing those eyelashes, but if you paint with a small brush, you get joins in your strokes, because by the time you go for more paint and you come back, if you're painting in an area and the brush is too small, the area is drying. So as soon as you don't need a small brush, you need to swap and go to a bigger one. So let's just zoom out of this a little bit here. There we go. And we'll carry on. This is looking very blue in there. So rather than add anything to it now, I'll let that dry. And if you've got an area and it's looking too blue, all you do is put the brown over the top. If yours was looking too brown, you put the blue over the top. It's as simple as that. So as far as painting all of these stripes now, you could wet them and do wet into wet. However, every time you do painting wet into wet, you're diluting the paint again. And as I said before, if we're going to be painting dark, creamier paint is better. So I am not going to wet an area. So I'm just going to make sure I've got nice creamy paint, and I'm going to scoop it up on my brush. I'm now using a number 8, which this is only a little 8 sheet piece of paper, so this brush might well be big enough. And if it's not, I could reach for another one. So now I'm just going to look for my area that I said was B for black, just so that I can see that I'm painting in the right spot. And with creamy paint now, that hopefully doesn't have to have anything extra done to it because I've put it down dark enough in the first place, I start painting in the lines. And I use a pressure on my brush. You'll see me turn my hand. So here's painting like downward strokes, but if you turn your hand the other way, you can do upward strokes as well. And you think, oh, well, what is the difference? Well, the paint gets released off the brush differently depending how you're holding it, because it changes the pressure that you're applying as it's hitting the paper. So I'm not painting the side of a house, so I'm not going down, you know, nice smooth strokes because, you know, I want it to look all even. I actually want these stripes to look a bit fuzzy, so they look like fur. If you're using the surface paper that's called rough, you might even help with something like this because it would give you a rough texture as you're painting, and you won't have to maybe do quite as much to create texture. But to create my texture, what I'm trying to do is release the paint off the brush, sometimes blue, sometimes brown, and in an interesting way. Now, if you look at that from this angle, it looks pretty much looking like black. So I'll just zoom in on that so you can see what variety there actually is in there. It's bluer in parts, it's browner in parts, it's got a jaggy edge, it's not smooth, because I don't want the, you know, it's not perfectly smooth stripes. There's black hair that goes into the white, or white hair that's gone into the black. We can't paint white hair going into the black because this is our white, unpainted paper. But we can paint the black going in, which will give us the same result. Now, I could work on the white stripes at the same time, but I tend to do all of the black ones first and then I do the white. So this is probably going to be a little bit boring for you to watch me do every single black stripe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple more and then I'll put it on a bit of speed painting. so that you can just see all the blacks going down, and then we can talk about what's happened when they're all done. So looking for my black here, I'll save doing down the bottom there so don't stick my hand in it. I'll do some of these smaller ones. But it can be a fairly quick painting, as I say, because you think, well, really, I suppose technically you are only doing half a painting because we are using the white of the paper for our white, but we can't leave it all totally unpainted. We are still going to have to do a bit of tissying around with it. So all the same method, putting in this black. So let me put this on a little bit of speed and get the blacks down. Okay, so that's what we'll do now. With this eye area here, it's actually skin, it's not fur, so it is smoother looking than what the fur is here. So I want to try and push it down a little bit smoother. So by doing that, I won't do my dabbing and pushing so much of the paint, I will do a little bit more of even painting, and I may even mix my paint together a little bit before I put it down rather than letting it mix on the paper. Mixing on the paper is always the most exciting way to paint, because you are not in total control of what's happening, but you get really nice results most of the time. But when you're painting a small area, it's okay to mix your paint up. I've got to lean over this bit at the bottom here to get into that eye area there, and I'm just mindful of not, you know, I've already got black paint on here, of dragging it up there. So I've just got to be a wee bit careful there. So let's just see how we can go putting this down and making it look smooth. I'll start at the top here, and it is a little bit browner on that edge. And then I can go into this quite mixed up area here. Having painted the eye first, that should be fairly dry. So not so tricky if I touch it. Oh, little white bits still in that fleshy part up there. Perhaps I won't try and fill them in entirely. I'll try and do what it is that I see. This fleshy bit is under here as well. So that's that light bit there. I'm just doing it a little bit carefully so that I think I'm putting the paint where it's supposed to go. That's that dark area that I painted, which I didn't think was dark enough, so I'll just put a wee bit more over that and a bit more in there. While I've got the dark paint. And there's a little bit of fleshy stuff just going on in there. When there's so much dark around an eye, sometimes it's going to be hard to get the darker little lines in that you want as well, but we'll see how we go. So I'll just soften this a little bit here and just trying to be careful about this little section here. It could be just softened a bit there. Perhaps could be a little bit softer there. If you want to look closely at this now, it does look a little bit like fur. Anyway, I'll just paint the darks and lights that I can see. Up the top here, trying still not to put my arm in this paint, but it is happening. To tell you, that happens to me a lot, because I don't stop painting, I keep painting, and unless you've got a dry area that you can move around to, it's going to happen. And what I'm going to do here, because I need to be able to paint in some folds, because they're folds in the eyeball here, I'm going to have to let that dry. You can't just keep manipulating around wet paint and expecting it to stay put every time you touch it. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to dry this with the hairdryer, and then I'm going to show you how to paint the whites. I think that's a good next step. So I've dried that off. It's not bone dry, but it's dry enough for me to be able to carry on. And I now can have a little look at this area up in here, and as I say, do the white stripes, and we're just about there. Beautiful long whiskers. Bottom lid eyelashes actually here. So they're going to be easy enough to do over the top of the white areas, and because of this little light area they've got left here, they will show on there as well. For the minute, I want to just see if I can just improve this eye area a little bit. Now it's dry. So I've got a clean brush here, taking off a lot of the water, just so that I can do a bit of lifting. Take two. I started on the eye. The video wasn't engaged. So what I need to do is just find a little bit of modelling of some light and shade just in this part down here, with just a few lines. So a thin brush, I've got this number 2 here, I'm just putting a few extra little lines. They may not be in exactly the same spot, in the right spot, but they will read okay when I finish. So we'll go down here for the edge of the eye there. Don't really want to have a white area on that part. I could have had a wee bit more light in this area at the top here. So as I say, lifting out is something you can do. So you rinse off your brush, take off a lot of the moisture, because you don't want to just take a great big blob of water over to your painting. So you use a tissue, take off a bit of the water, and just do a little bit of, with a small brush, so this is the number 2, just a few little dots here and there, tiny little dab, and you get back some lights. That's a good thing about French ultramarine, blue and burnt sienna. They lift really nicely. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So I think we're just about ready to try and do the white stripes. I'm probably getting a bit too fussy with this for a demo. This joins up over here. So it's got a bit more of a point on it. Okay, this eye here is now too white. It just needs to just have a little bit of colour put in there. You needed to have saved it, otherwise you would really be trying to lift out a good white line there, but it doesn't have to be bright white, especially where it's got down the bottom there. So I just tone that down with a bit of paint on there. Okay, let's do these big white areas now. So if you look at the reference photo that I'm using here, as I say, you can see that there is colour in the white stripes. I don't want to do lots of little dib, dab, dob things to get little dots of colour in there. But what I'm going to do, I'm just going to at least get the colour from the black to meld into the white stripes, so they don't look like one's plastered over the top of the other. And to do that, I generally just agitate what I've put down. I've just got to find which brush I'm going to use to do that. So here's this number 8. Let's start with one at the top here on the edge and just see what happens. So if I take my brush, take off a lot of the moisture, the same as when I'm lifting out really, and I just stroke it in a couple of places down the edge of the stripe here, and then tickle that damp area has started to just soften the edge of the paint, and you can just let it come over into the white. Obviously you don't want it to come over into the white a lot, you know, a lot of colour, but nothing really needs to be pure white, other than just in a few spots. So just go easy at it. So if you go too hard and too much comes out, you'll have to get to it quickly with a damp brush and take off the colour that you don't want. But I'm quite happy to have a little bit of it bleed over. But I do this in little baby steps. I just don't go wetting it all and let it bleed too much. I really just try and do it just at the edges. And then in the middle of the white stripes, well, that's a whole another step if it's needed. So I will just see. So here I am. I've dampened the edge of the stripe. I'm now just tickling the dark paint from the black and saying, move into the white stripe, sort of in a in between the white hairs. And if you really want to get a little bit of special colour in there, like this is a little bit brown, just there, you could just dip into your burnt sienna, only the burnt sienna, and just add a little bit of brown in there. I'll just see if I can zoom in on that and see if that is actually, you can see what I'm doing there. So I'm just encouraging the dark paint to go into the white stripe. And I do this all over. So I just wet the edge of the stripe, wet the edge around here. If it looks like a lot has to go in, well, you know, you could put down a bit more water, go a bit wider with the damp brush and encourage it to come out a little bit further. But if it's only a little bit that you need, so I can see it's a little bit brown there. Here I just want to soften it, just so that it melds in. Soften it there. Everywhere really. Every bit of the black has to be softened into the white. Now if you'd used masking fluid to do this, when you took the masking fluid off, you would have even more of a sharp edge here that would need softening than having done it this way. So you still would have to do this process even if you'd used masking fluid, and then you've used a bottle of masking fluid to paint one subject, and you can see how easy it is to do it and not use masking fluid. If it looks a little bit too much colour, clean water. By the time you make the clean water go a bit further, it dilutes anything that you've got there. So let's quickly move around all of this and agitate it all. So I'll put this little bit on speed painting, I think. So in a couple of places, I'm just adding a wee bit of extra paint in. So where I've wet an area, I can just drop in a bit of, see I see it a little bit brown on this edge up here. So I can put the brown paint in, then soften that brown paint to try and get the illusion of the white mixing with the dark. Over here, sort of got some mini patterns going on in here. So I will just paint those into this wet area that's here and let them sit there. So if it doesn't look like the paint shifted, just go dip into your paint, let it touch the wet area that you did make and try for a bit more. What you're doing, you're trying to get raggy edges to the black stripes because that makes it look like the colour from the stripes of the white and the black are all intermingled as opposed to one being on the top of another. Okay, so when you've done all that agitation, you've got to look at it now and say, have I got enough colour? This needs to be a little bit more coming out down below here. And I really want to darken up what's going on just up in here a bit more. So like a second bit of colour there. And I'm just about there. We're going to do those long bottom lashes, I guess. But look how long this one is here. It goes all the way down here. Darken up the eye if you need to. It's looking a little bit brown here. I could drop a bit more blue in. There's always tweaking to do. I've quite happy with how the stripes have come out and melded in together. If you want to put a lot more colour onto your white stripes, after you've dried it off like this, you could, and I wasn't going to bother doing this, but I'll do it in one section. You could wet the white stripe, clean water, because I don't want the edge to have come all the way in, but I could decide that it could have a wee bit more colour in the white part itself in the middle, and I could just take my brush into that wet area that I've just put and just do a little bit of calligraphy, squiggles or something, and you can still then soften those into that water. So if you feel like it looks too stark, clean water. See, in some places it doesn't really look like it needs very much at all, but I could see under the eye there, that close up there, it looked like it was a bit darker. So you could just wet it. Try it with this time, and just drop a little bit of extra paint. Where did I do this one? Didn't really need much there. It's a little bit over here. And just dirty up the white a little bit more. Maybe a wee bit up in here. So that's all it needs. A little bit of extra colour. Quite like them looking quite so dotty there. Before you know it, and I've lost all the white. So let's just leave it at that. So now I've got to quickly dry that again. Right, last tiny bit, eyelashes. I could use the finest brush that I've got. For me, that probably is a number 2, and get some nice downward strokes for that. I could do that quite easily, but I wanted to show you another thing that you can do when you get to just the little bits like whiskers and eyelashes. You can buy liner pens. You can buy them in white, but you can buy them in you know, all sorts of colours. These are black. They come in different thicknesses. And I'm going to pick the finest one I've got, which is a number 2. And the idea with these is that you could do a fast, thin stroke and put the eyelashes in. So that's what I'm going to do. And they're nice and long, and they come down into this white area here. So they may not show so much over the dark, but doing it in the pen will help a little bit. Because if I come from below the thing here and I come out like this, I can just see them on the top. So you don't have to do every one, and they don't have to be exactly as you're seeing them here. I love this long one that's coming all the way over here, so I'm definitely going to do him. Just enough. I probably could have used a slightly thicker pen or press a little harder. Now this is fade proof pigment ink. So once you've got this here, it is here. So you can't go fussing around and think you're going to be able to shift it. Could I use it for anywhere else? I don't think. I think these are all basically done with that. Okay, so that's it for today. Hope you've enjoyed that. I've enjoyed getting back into filming. I just hope now I get back into the editing. That's the bit that always does my head in. Doing the painting part is easy if the filming takes. Putting it together into a little movie really does stretch my brain and takes me generally about half a day. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing, please consider subscribing. Or keep an eye on my website, as I said. Look at sharing the journey on my blog page. You'll find plenty of tips and techniques that I've shared on there too. So until next time, bye.